A burst of laughter rolled across the reception hall just as a server stopped beside my chair. "I'm so sorry, ma'am," she whispered, avoiding my eyes. "We've been asked to move you." I looked around, confused. Every other member of my family was seated together beneath the glowing floral arch, raising champagne glasses while photographers circled their table. My place card had been there all afternoon. "What do you mean, move me?" The young server swallowed nervously. The bride requested a seating change. Before I could answer, my younger sister Vanessa tapped her fork against a crystal glass. "Oh, everyone," she called brightly. "Tiny adjustment. We decided family tables should really be for couples and, well, successful adults." The room erupted with awkward laughter. My face burned as another server quietly lifted my plate and carried it toward a lonely table tucked beside a stone pillar near the back of the ballroom. Vanessa smiled directly at me. "I know you'll understand, Gina." I forced my legs to move. If I argued now, I'd become the bitter older sister who ruined the wedding. So I walked. Every eye followed me. By the time I reached the empty table, the applause had already resumed. Except one person wasn't clapping. A man seated 2 tables away had watched the entire exchange without smiling once. I lowered myself into the chair, staring at the untouched place setting that had obviously been assembled in a hurry. Even the centerpiece looked borrowed from another table. Vanessa lifted her champagne flute again. "Let's also celebrate my wonderful big sister," she announced with a grin. "Still unmarried at 34, but hey, there's always hope." More laughter. My mother covered her mouth as though embarrassed, yet she never corrected her. My father simply leaned toward my uncle and muttered loudly enough for me to hear. "Please don't let Gina make tonight about herself." I looked down before anyone could see the tears threatening my eyes. This wasn't new. For years I had been the dependable one, the daughter everyone called whenever money was short, errands needed running, or someone needed rescuing. I had spent weekends helping Vanessa compare venues, reviewing contracts, assembling invitation boxes, even calming vendors whenever deadlines slipped. Every time she thanked me in private, I believed maybe this wedding would finally be different. Instead, I had become part of the entertainment. As the speeches continued, I noticed something strange. Several members of the venue staff exchanged uncomfortable glances every time Vanessa joked about me. One older waiter actually shook his head before walking back toward the kitchen. Then the same man who had refused to laugh stood up. He carried his drink across the ballroom with calm, deliberate steps and stopped beside my table. Without asking permission, he pulled out the empty chair beside mine and sat down. Only then did he lean slightly closer. His voice was quiet enough that no one else could hear. "Pretend we're dating." I blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" He calmly extended his hand across the table. "Trust me." My pulse hammered as I looked from his outstretched hand to Vanessa, who was laughing with another group of guests. None of this made sense. But something in his expression told me he wasn't joking. After one long breath, Ethan's hand was warm and steady. I looked at it for another second before letting out the breath I'd been holding. "All right," I whispered. He smiled, not triumphantly, not flirtatiously, just with quiet reassurance, and gently closed his fingers around mine. "Good." Across the ballroom, Vanessa's laughter faltered for the first time that evening. She glanced toward my table. Her smile narrowed. "Relax," Ethan murmured. "Just follow my lead." "I don't even know your name." "You will." He stood and offered his arm as naturally as though we'd arrived together. Every instinct told me to pull away. Instead, I rose beside him. Almost immediately, conversations around us began to shift. "Who is that?" "I thought Gina came alone." "I've never seen him before." I wanted the floor to open beneath me. "If this is some kind of joke," I whispered. "It isn't." He guided me toward the refreshment table instead of the dance floor, giving everyone plenty of time to notice us without making a spectacle. Only after we stopped did he extend his hand properly. "I'm Ethan Brooks." "Gina." "I know." That answer caught me off guard. "You know me. I've heard enough to recognize you." Before I could ask what he meant, a passing server smiled warmly at me. "It's nice to finally see someone sitting with you, Ms. Carter." Ethan noticed my surprise. "You thanked every employee today," he said quietly. "Most people don't." I blinked. "You notice that?" "I notice how people treat those who can't do anything for them." For the first time all evening, someone wasn't talking about my relationship status, my age, or my appearance. They were talking to me, not about me. It felt strangely unfamiliar. "I should probably tell you," I said softly. "My sister already thinks I'm an embarrassment." "I gathered that. You don't know my family." "No," he replied calmly, "but I know humiliation when I see it." For several moments, neither of us spoke. The music continued. Guests laughed. Photographers moved between tables. It almost felt like the evening had returned to normal. Then Ethan asked quietly, "Do they always treat you like that?" I stared into my untouched glass. "My whole life." He waited. I appreciated that. Most people rush to fill silence. He simply let me decide whether I wanted to keep talking. "My parents always said Vanessa needed more attention than I did," I admitted. "Whenever something went wrong, I was expected to fix it because I was the responsible one. And you did. I thought if I kept helping, eventually they'd see me differently." Instead, another bitter laugh escaped me. "I organized vendor meetings. I handled seating charts. I spent evenings fixing problems no one else wanted." I looked across the ballroom. My name wasn't mentioned once. Ethan followed my gaze toward the head table. "They made sure of that." Something about the certainty in his voice made me turn back toward him. "You sound like you've met them before." "No, but I've met people exactly like them." Across the room, Vanessa wrapped an arm around our mother while smiling for another series of photographs. To every guest, they looked like the perfect family. Only I knew how carefully that picture had been arranged. "I shouldn't complain," I said automatically. Ethan looked directly at me. "There." "What?" "You apologized again." I frowned. "For what?" "For telling the truth." The words landed harder than I expected. I searched my memory. He was right. I'd apologized 3 times since he'd sat down. As though honesty itself required permission. He leaned against the table. "Can I ask you something?" "I guess." "When everything was falling apart before this wedding." I looked up. "Did they at least thank you for paying what you paid?" Every sound in the ballroom seemed to disappear. I felt the blood drain from my face. "What?" My voice barely came out. "What did you just say?" His expression didn't change. "You heard me." "No." I stepped backward. "How do you know I paid for anything?" "No one knew. Not my friends. Not my coworkers. Not even my relatives. I had never told a single person outside my immediate family that I'd quietly covered a massive portion of Vanessa's wedding expenses after our parents admitted they couldn't afford the remaining balance. I had promised to keep it secret. So how could this complete stranger possibly know? The music swelled as the DJ invited every couple onto the dance floor. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced cheerfully, "let's have all our couples join the bride and groom for our first celebration dance." I instinctively took a step backward. "I should sit down." Ethan looked at me. "Why?" "Because everyone already thinks this is ridiculous. They're already watching." He extended his hand again. "So we might as well give them something better to watch." I laughed despite myself. It was the first genuine laugh I'd managed all evening. You're very persuasive. I've been told. Taking one slow breath, I placed my hand in his. Together, we walked toward the dance floor. Conversations faded around us. Heads turned. My cousins whispered behind their glasses. Several relatives leaned toward each other. I thought she came alone. Who is he? Have you ever seen him before? By the time we reached the edge of the dance floor, I could practically feel Vanessa staring at us. Ethan placed one hand gently at my waist. You don't have to perform. I'm trying not to panic. I noticed. I haven't danced in years. Perfect. I looked up. Why is that perfect? Because neither have I. That unexpected confession made me smile. The band eased into a slow melody. Instead of pretending to be wildly romantic, we simply talked while moving carefully through the crowd. You know, Ethan said quietly, you're smiling differently now. What does that mean? Earlier you smiled because everyone expected you to. And now? Now you forgot anyone was watching. For a brief moment, I actually had. Until applause suddenly stopped. A sharp voice sliced across the ballroom. Gina. The music continued, but everyone nearby turned. Vanessa stood only a few feet away. Her smile was polished. Her eyes weren't. She slowly looked Ethan up and down. Interesting. Neither of us answered. She folded her arms. So. She tilted her head toward me. How long have the two of you been pretending? Several guests laughed nervously. Vanessa wasn't finished. I mean, honestly, Gina, this isn't another one of those blind dates that disappears after a week, is it? A few relatives chuckled louder. I felt my face warm again. Before I could respond, Ethan answered calmly. Actually, he extended his hand. My name is Ethan Brooks. Vanessa barely glanced at it. I'm Vanessa, the bride. I know. She smirked. I'm sure Gina forgot to mention that she has a habit of making weddings about herself. I didn't. I wasn't speaking to you. The sentence landed like a slap. I opened my mouth. But Ethan spoke first. I believe she was invited. Vanessa forced another smile. Of course she was. She looked directly at me. Family obligations. Before I could answer, another voice interrupted. Ethan. An older gentleman wearing a tailored navy suit crossed the ballroom with genuine surprise. There you are. His face lit up as he shook Ethan's hand warmly. I've been trying to find you all evening. Ethan smiled. Good to see you again, Richard. Vanessa frowned. You two know each other. The older man laughed. Know each other. He looked around at several nearby guests. Ethan practically saved this entire renovation project. Only then did I recognize the man. He wasn't another guest. He was Richard Lawson, the owner of the entire wedding venue. Several local business owners immediately walked over. Ethan, when did you get here? It's been months. People who hadn't given my table a second glance all evening were suddenly greeting him with genuine admiration. Vanessa's confidence visibly slipped. She had expected another awkward stranger. Instead, she'd confronted one of the most respected people in the room. Richard smiled toward me. So, he looked between us. I finally get to meet the woman you've heard so much about. I froze. Vanessa froze too. You've heard about me? I asked. Richard nodded warmly. Quite a bit. Before I could ask another question, Ethan gently smiled. I've been looking forward to this introduction. Vanessa stepped between us. I'm sorry, but I think we're interrupting the reception. Her voice carried just enough tension for nearby guests to notice. Richard raised an eyebrow. Interrupting. Ethan answered politely. I was just telling Gina how generous she is. Vanessa's smile disappeared. There isn't any reason to discuss that. Their parents exchanged a quick, anxious glance from across the room. Richard looked from Ethan to Vanessa. His expression subtly changed. Guests nearby had gone completely silent. Generosity. What generosity? What exactly were they talking about? Vanessa suddenly spun toward the stage. She waved sharply at the bandleader. Stop the music. The instruments fell silent one by one. Every conversation in the ballroom ended. Hundreds of eyes turned toward us. Silence settled over the ballroom. Even the photographers lowered their cameras. Vanessa stood near the stage with one hand wrapped tightly around the microphone. Her smile had vanished. She looked directly at me. I've tried very hard to make tonight about celebrating my marriage. Her voice echoed through the reception hall. But apparently, my sister has decided she needs attention after all. A few relatives nodded immediately. My aunt crossed her arms. Typical. Another cousin muttered, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. She couldn't let Vanessa have one day. I opened my mouth to answer. I didn't. Vanessa cut me off. No. She pointed toward Ethan. You show up with some mystery man halfway through my reception, start whispering with the venue owner, and suddenly everyone is staring at you instead of the bride. Several guests looked back and forth between us. The room waited. Ethan calmly stepped beside me. This isn't about attention. Vanessa laughed. Oh. Then what is it about? Before Ethan could respond, my father hurried across the ballroom. Enough, he said firmly. He looked at me instead of Vanessa. Gina. His voice carried the familiar tone I'd heard my entire life. Don't make this worse. I stared at him. I haven't done anything. You've done enough. My mother joined him moments later. She forced a smile toward the guests. Families have misunderstandings. Then she quietly whispered toward me. Please, just let this go. For years, I always had. Every insult, every forgotten birthday, every sacrifice that became someone else's achievement. Every time I was expected to apologize, simply because peace mattered more than fairness. Tonight, something felt different. Before I could answer, Richard Lawson slowly walked forward. The venue owner looked around the ballroom before stopping beside Ethan. His expression wasn't angry. It was disappointed. I don't believe Ms. Carter has caused tonight's problem. Vanessa forced a laugh. Mr. Lawson, with respect, this is a family matter. I know. And we'd appreciate privacy. Richard looked at her quietly. I would have respected that. He paused. If the truth hadn't been dragged into the middle of your reception. A ripple of whispers spread through the guests. Vanessa's husband frowned. What truth? Vanessa answered too quickly. There isn't one. Ethan folded his hands calmly. Months ago, Richard and I worked together reviewing renovation plans for this property. Several guests listened carefully. During those meetings, Ethan continued, we occasionally discussed the challenges involved in preparing for large weddings. Richard nodded. I remember one conversation very clearly. He looked directly at Vanessa's parents. You were worried the reception would have to be canceled. My mother's face lost its color. My father remained silent. The groom slowly turned toward his new in-laws. Canceled. Vanessa stepped forward. We handled it. Richard answered gently. No. You were helped. The ballroom grew even quieter. Someone near the back whispered. Helped by who? Richard looked toward me, then back toward the guests. There was one person who quietly paid the remaining balance after the Carter family could no longer afford the wedding. A dozen heads immediately turned toward Vanessa. Naturally, Everyone assumed the bride had stepped in. Vanessa straightened her shoulders, but said nothing. Ethan finally broke the silence. Should I tell them who actually paid? Vanessa's head snapped toward him. No. Her voice came out sharper than she intended. This has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with someone who spent tonight being humiliated. My father took one hurried step forward. Ethan, I think you've said enough. Ethan never raised his voice. I haven't said anything yet. Vanessa pointed toward the ballroom entrance. I think it's time for you to leave. Instead of moving, Ethan simply looked at Richard. The older man slowly nodded. Then he faced the guests. I believe. He let the silence linger. Everyone here deserves to know the truth. Richard stepped forward until he stood beside Ethan. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. I've owned this venue for 27 years, he said. I've hosted hundreds of weddings. I've seen families celebrate, argue, reconcile, and occasionally fall apart. But I've never seen someone publicly humiliate the very person who made the celebration possible. The room became so quiet that the soft hum of the chandeliers seemed loud. Vanessa forced a nervous smile. Mr. Lawson, I think you've misunderstood. No. He shook his head. I understood perfectly. He looked toward the guests. When the Carter family informed us they could no longer pay the remaining balance, we prepared to postpone this wedding. The groom slowly turned toward Vanessa. You told me everything was paid. She avoided his eyes. It was. Richard continued. It was paid because someone arrived at my office the following morning. He looked directly at me. Miss Gina Carter. Every head in the ballroom turned. I wish they hadn't. I had never wanted recognition. I remember exactly what she said, Richard continued. Please don't tell my sister. I don't want her wedding ruined. The silence became heavier. She paid the outstanding balance. She covered the florist's final invoice. She paid the musicians. And when one vendor increased their price at the last minute, she quietly paid that too. Gasps spread across the room. My aunt slowly lowered her champagne glass. My cousins stared at me in disbelief. Richard's voice softened. She asked for only one thing. That no one ever know. Vanessa looked at our parents. Neither of them spoke. Instead, my father lowered his eyes. My mother quietly began crying. The groom's expression changed completely. He looked at Vanessa. You told me your parents sacrificed their savings. Vanessa swallowed. You let me thank you. You let me thank your parents. You let me believe my sister-in-law never contributed anything. Vanessa's voice trembled. I didn't ask her to pay. No, I said quietly. You didn't. Everyone looked at me. I took one slow breath. I offered because I knew how much this day meant to you. My voice remained calm. I thought if your wedding happened exactly the way you dreamed, maybe afterward we'd finally be sisters. Vanessa couldn't answer. I never expected thanks. I looked around the ballroom. But I also never expected to be removed from my seat because I wasn't married. Several guests lowered their heads. The same relatives who had laughed minutes earlier couldn't meet my eyes. My father finally stepped forward. Gina, I'm sorry. It was the first genuine apology I had ever heard from him. My mother reached toward my hand. We should never have let this happen. I gently stepped back. I spent years believing that if I gave enough, eventually I'd be enough. A tear rolled down my mother's face. You were always enough. No. I smiled sadly. If you had believed that, tonight would have looked very different. The groom removed his wedding ring for a moment and stared at it. Then he looked at Vanessa. How many other things have you let people believe? Vanessa opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Trust had disappeared from his eyes. Several relatives quietly left their tables. The celebration everyone had worked so hard to impress people with no longer felt like a celebration at all. My father tried again. "We can fix this." I gently shook my head. "No." He looked stunned. "I've spent my whole life fixing things for this family. The seating arrangements, the bills, the emergencies, the excuses. I'm done." No one argued, because everyone knew I was telling the truth. I reached into my purse and removed the envelope containing the remaining vendor receipts I had kept for my own records. I placed them on the nearest table. "You won't need me to cover anything else." Then I turned toward Ethan. He hadn't interrupted once. He hadn't tried to rescue me. He had simply stood beside me until I found my own voice. "You never answered my first question," I said with a small smile. He raised an eyebrow. "Which one?" "Why me?" He smiled back. "Because before I ever met you, Richard told me about a woman who thanked every employee by name, refused recognition, and paid for someone else's happiness." He shrugged lightly. "I wanted to meet someone like that. For the first time all evening." I laughed without forcing it. Weeks later, Ethan and I met for coffee. There was no pretending. No performance. No need to prove anything. What began as one act of kindness slowly became something honest. Family gatherings changed after the wedding. Some relatives reached out with sincere apologies. Others stayed away, embarrassed by their own silence. Vanessa's marriage survived, but the image she had spent years carefully building never fully recovered. People remembered the wedding less for the decorations than for the moment the truth came out. As for my parents, they finally understood that love cannot survive where respect is absent. Whether our relationship would ever fully heal remained uncertain, but one thing had changed forever. They no longer expected me to sacrifice myself to keep the family comfortable. And I no longer offered. Looking back, I realized the most important moment of that evening wasn't when Ethan asked me to pretend we were dating. It was the moment I finally stopped pretending that I had to earn a place in my own family.